Napoleon Dynamite is set in 2004, but it stayed away from many of the popular trends of the era. This is true of the overall filmmaking, but also of the objects, fashion, and design in the movie. They span from the 2000s all the way back to the 70s. The film had to include the shot of Napoleon's student ID just so people knew when it took place. And that gives it a really cool, timeless feeling, and ironically, by avoiding the bigger themes and cliches of the era, it reminds us of what life was really like for many of us in the early 2000s. Many of the popular shows and movies of the time didn't reflect real life. They were caricatures, exaggerations, things were chaotic, cutting edge, larger than life, packed with excess and drama. But Napoleon Dynamite was different. It was a series of vignettes about quirky misfits in very ordinary situations, and as a result, it captured something really special about growing up in that time. 20 years later, it still feels oddly familiar. Now, first I need to say that the movie characters seem to be slightly exaggerated versions of actual people, and I'm going to talk about them in that context. Jared Hess, the guy who made the movie, said it's a very autobiographical film, made from snapshots of his life growing up in a small town in the 90s, and I personally find a lot of aspects of these characters relatable. We romanticize the 90s and early 2000s a lot nowadays, and while a lot of that comes from viewing the past through a nostalgic lens, I think it also speaks to something much deeper. A lot of us are starting to recognize what experts have been saying for a while, that social media is doing something to us, and it probably isn't very good, to say the least. And while very few of us want to do away with technology completely, I think many of us wish for a time when the world wasn't quite so digital, a time when things felt tactile and slower. Millennials grew up with traditional media at its most saturated point and had the early stages of digital media too. Yet most of us grew up without the current form of social media with its algorithms and all-out emphasis on engagement. And I think this distinction is so key to our experiences. The characters in the movie reflect how a lot of us were before social media. They don't have that underlying anxiety-riddled self-awareness, and they do cringe, uncool things all the time, often without even knowing it. And obviously, they still had to deal with the things that teenagers have always had to deal with. We've always cared deeply about what other people think and how many friends we have. I mean, even Napoleon constantly lies for clout, and he pretty clearly wants more friends, but we weren't pressured 24/7 with images and videos of other people's perfectly curated lives and algorithmic content designed to keep us scrolling, even if we're not liking what we're seeing, and we weren't pressured with this weird feeling of being watched at all times. So while the anxiety still sucked, it definitely felt more manageable than it does now in the context of social media. Now, I don't want to make it sound like the 2000s were some paradise for individuality and self-expression, because that wasn't the case, especially for people who were even the slightest bit different or experienced a lot of social pressure. It was a harsher and less inclusive time, to be sure. I mean, Napoleon himself gets bullied in the movie. And social media isn't all bad. It can serve as a way to find communities and friendships that we might not have in real life. So I don't want to understate that. But speaking purely from my own experience, not only does it feel like we had less anxiety before social media, but like Napoleon, a lot of us simply didn't know what was cool. Or we thought we did, but we didn't. And that's kind of refreshing. Like, Napoleon's perception of what is cool and uncool is so untethered to reality, but that makes him a better character. It makes him more interesting, more funny, more unique, more confident, simply because he doesn't know any better. He doesn't know that his drawings suck. He doesn't know that his fashion sense is strange. And that lets him actually appreciate things too. Like, what a concept, enjoying and liking things, maybe the biggest relic of the past in this film. And I know the things that make a good movie character don't necessarily make a good person in real life, but there is something refreshing about a healthy level of naivete. I mean, look at Pedro. Yeah, he's embarrassed when he shaves his head, but then he gets this wig from Deb that's so absurd and strange, but he's super proud of it. He doesn't know that it doesn't technically look cool, but that's ironically what makes it actually cool. for the audience and for the character. Then there's Deb. She's not an outgoing person, but her fashion sense is bold and vibrant, heavily influenced by the 80s, which is possibly the loudest decade yet. And she either doesn't know that it stands out, or she doesn't care, or she's doing it on purpose. But no matter the reason, this commitment to being yourself feels like something to aspire to. And they kind of remind me of how I used to be in high school or college. Like, I used to try out all these different looks just because I liked them. Not because I did a social media deep dive on the trendiest fits of the year, not because the algorithm fed me some niche internet subculture that I now felt pressure to fit into, and not because it looked a certain way in photos. I tried things because I saw them somewhere, and I liked them. There used to be something really fun about having eclectic tastes and trying different things and pulling from a lot of influences to create your own sense of style and individuality, like the characters in this movie do. But the post-TikTok algorithmic social media ecosystem pretty much ruined that, at least for me. Like nowadays, social media platforms have exacerbated feelings of competition or self-awareness regarding one's looks and have created an epidemic around body image and physical appearance. Now, a lot of this was a problem before social media, and fashion choices have often come from a place of insecurity or competition. But the platforms have made it so much worse. Or maybe another example that's kind of like Napoleon himself. I started doing graphic design in high school for fun just because I saw some things on the internet that looked cool and I wanted to do things like that. And my designs were bad, like really bad, kind of like Napoleon's drawings, but I didn't know they were bad at the time and I had a lot of fun with it. I posted my crappy designs on forums and I volunteered to design for local organizations. And I kept being bad until I was actually pretty good. And that was really fun. But you know what isn't fun? Going on social media and instantly being bombarded with dozens of algorithmically suggested designers who are ostensibly just like you, except they're way better at design, and they have these perfectly and seemingly effortlessly curated feeds, and they have tens of thousands of followers, while every time I post my designs, I lose a couple followers because they only followed me for some hyper-specific niche reason, and going outside of that is kind of frowned upon on social media nowadays. And again, I don't want to make it seem like issues around competition and body image or whatnot were better for everyone back then. For a lot of people, it was just as bad or worse. But I absolutely think we'd be better off if they never invented the current algorithmic, hyper-engaged version of social media. Every generation feels like the way they grew up was best, but I feel like at this point, even a lot of younger people who grew up on social media wish that they didn't. And that's telling. Before I go on, I need to say that this movie looks a lot better than I remember. Probably because I watched it on this exact TV the first time. Anyway, the colors are deep and vibrant, and they often complement the specific kind of film they shot on really well. The compositions of the shots are wonderful, and it's hard to believe that the filmmakers made this right out of film school. I especially love how they portray the old technology. It feels like what people would do nowadays to manufacture a nostalgic vibe, except in this movie it feels completely natural and effortless. Since Napoleon grew up in a lower middle class family, the tech he used was mostly from the 80s or 90s. At the time, technology was changing rapidly and was often exorbitantly priced at first. So for example, an iPod was $400 when it first came out, which could pay your rent in a lot of places at the time. So it makes sense that Napoleon has a Walkman, even though it's kind of funny that he doesn't even have a CD player by that point. As far as technology goes, the 90s to early 2000s often feel like an idyllic, near-perfect balance to so many of us. Like it's right between an old world with little to no digital technology and the current world, which has become digitized at nearly every point. During that time, we had access to various forms of media at a level that our parents didn't come close to experiencing. Our childhoods were filled with video games, movies, cable TV, the early internet, and music that we could listen to anywhere. And yet, unlike future generations, we lacked immediate access to most of those things, and our options were much more limited. The clunky physical nature of our technology often served to tether our experiences back to the real world and the people around us. Simply put, you couldn't doom scroll on a flip phone, but you could call your friends. You could still watch hundreds of movies, but you'd go to a video store first and probably decide on a movie with your family. playing music was a tactile, physical experience. Even Kip, who's supposed to be a chronically online internet nerd, even he only talks to LaFonda at designated times, and he has to be at home to do that. Compare that to dating apps. I mean, you can literally be on a date with one person and your phone will buzz to tell you that a different person matched with you and sent you a message. There's something weirdly dystopian about that. And this scene where Napoleon has to walk outside with a corded phone, this unlocks some core memory from the 90s that I didn't know that I had. While corded phones felt really annoying at the time, if given the choice, I might just choose that world over the one I'm in now, where I can't sit still for more than 10 seconds without feeling a twitch telling me to check my phone. And you know the iconic dance at the end of the film? It comes about because Napoleon finds a VHS tape about learning how to dance at the local thrift store. And I did something similar. I learned how to play the guitar from a DVD that I found at the library. And there were a lot more steps and limitations than just looking something up on YouTube, but I remember them all fondly. I liked going to the library and finding a DVD. I liked that I chose one option and had to stick with it. I liked talking to the librarian behind the counter. I liked how official a library card felt, since the only other thing in my wallet was like $3. I liked the anticipation during the drive home. I liked handling the DVD and carefully placing it in the tray. I liked the feeling of using the remote with those satisfying rubber buttons to rewind, pause, and play. And note, I didn't say fast forward. I sat through the boring intros because my brain was not yet accustomed to instant gratification. I liked that too. And our only TV was in the living room, but I liked being around when my mom was cooking dinner. Until, you know, my sister kicked me off to watch Law & Order. And it's sad to think that this only existed for like a single 30-year window. There were hundreds of generations before us that did not have personal computers and widespread cable TV, and potentially every generation after us, at least in the West, will have an extremely online hyper-reality. But the tactile physical technology from the late 70s to early 2000s will likely never be fully implemented at that scale again. And if it were just like old people like me saying these things, then I'd probably dismiss it, but young people seem to miss it too, even if they didn't experience it much. I won't pretend to know where the world is heading, and if I'm honest, I feel ambivalent at best about the state of everything, but I'll need to cover that in a future video because I have a lot more thoughts and musings on the topic. Until then, thanks for watching, and I hope all of your wildest dreams come true.